Imagine bleeding out in the dark, drop by drop, for years, only to realize the person collecting your blood is simply pouring it down the drain. This is the horrifying reality of giving your soul to someone who only ever saw you as a convenience. We have all been conditioned to believe that love is a battlefield, but what happens when you are the only one dying on it? It is a specific, suffocating kind of silence that falls over a person the exact moment they realize their greatest sacrifices were never enough, a quiet, internal implosion that shatters the mind without making a single sound. Wolf King Stories warmly welcomes you to a journey into the darkest, most broken corners of the human heart. If you have ever felt invisible in the shadow of your own sacrifices, I urge you to subscribe to the channel right now. Your support fuels our passion to bring you more profound, soul-stirring stories that you won't find anywhere else. To understand this psychological wreckage, we must delve into the tragic life of Claire. On the surface, this is a tale set in the mystical world of shifters and werewolf packs, but if you strip away the fantasy, you are left with a reflection so blindingly human it physically hurts. In the strict, hierarchical society of the pack, Claire is a healer. But look past the magic to see what that role truly represents in the rawest human sense. A healer is the ultimate empath, a creature destined to absorb the agony of others so that they might thrive, slowly hollowing themselves out in the process. For years, Claire's entire universe orbited a single devastating son, Ethan, the future Alpha. She did not just love him, she weaponized her own life force to mend his wounds, standing silently in his shadow, meticulously paving his road to power with pieces of her own spirit. Why do we stay when it hurts so much? It is a psychological trap known as the Sunk Cost Fallacy, and Claire was drowning in it. When you have poured the best years of your youth into a losing endeavor, your mind tricks you into believing that giving just a little more will finally tip the scales. Claire operated on a tragic, fundamentally flawed belief system. She thought she could buy his love through extreme self-depletion. She believed that if she made herself utterly indispensable, if she bled just a little more for him, he would have no choice but to cherish her. She equated her utility with her lovability, completely blind to the tragic fact that when you price yourself this way, you become a commodity, not a partner. The true devastation of this story does not occur on a bloody battlefield. It happens in the suffocatingly mundane, quiet cruelty of betrayal. The exact moment Ethan ascends to his alpha throne, the ultimate reward for Claire's lifelong sacrifice, he does not reach for the woman who built him. He chooses Olivia, a woman politically advantageous, dripping in high status, and superficially perfect. This singular decision violently shatters the foundational illusion of Claire's entire existence, laying bare a brutal truth. Ethan never saw Claire as an equal, but merely as a biological and emotional utility. Looking closely at Ethan, you see the textbook definition of narcissistic entitlement. He consumed Claire's devotion not as a precious, irreplaceable gift, but as a mandatory tribute he firmly believed he was owed. When a narcissist treats a human being as a resource, that person's eventual depletion is expected, and their replacement is already factored in. For Claire, this is a dual apocalypse. It is the agonizing death of a romance, but more importantly, it is the total collapse of her worldview. She is forced to confront the horrifying reality that love is not a mathematical equation where inputting endless sacrifice guarantees devotion as an output. She willingly commodified her own soul for a man who used her as a stepping stone. As we walk through this opening chapter of Claire's shattered life, I want you to look deep inside your own reflections and ask a painful, terrifying question. How many of us are currently bleeding ourselves dry right now, desperately hoping our utter exhaustion will finally be rewarded with someone else's love? When you realize your utter exhaustion has only purchased your own obsolescence, the only path left is the agonizing, solitary walk into exile. For Claire, leaving the pack was not a cinematic moment of righteous fury. It was the slow, dragging march of a ghost who had just witnessed her own funeral. The psychological toll of being discarded by the very people you have kept alive is a uniquely paralyzing form of trauma. In the immediate aftermath of Ethan's betrayal, Claire was not merely a woman suffering from a broken heart, she was a victim of severe identity theft, perpetrated by the man she loved. In the strictly regimented world of the pack, she had been defined entirely by her utility. She was the healer. She was the mender of bones, the soother of fevers, the invisible shield that kept the Alpha's arrogance insulated from fatal consequences. Without her patient to drain her, without the relentless demands of her abuser, Claire was thrust into a terrifying vacuum of purpose. The silence of the wild beyond the pack's borders was deafening, but it was nothing compared to the screaming void inside her own mind. We often talk about the pain of a breakup, but rarely do we discuss the severe neurological withdrawal that accompanies the severing of a trauma bond. Claire's body and mind had been subjected to years of intermittent reinforcement. Ethan would offer her crumbs of validation just as she was on the verge of collapse, ensuring she stayed hooked to the cycle of sacrifice. Now, wandering through the unforgiving terrain of the rogue lands, Claire suffered the physical symptoms of this sudden detachment. Her hands, instinctively wired to reach out and absorb the pain of others, trembled with unused energy. Her mind, conditioned to constantly monitor Ethan's moods and physical needs, spun out of control, searching for a crisis to solve. This is the darkest phase of betrayal, the absolute loss of self. When you have spent decades pouring your liquid soul into a cracked vessel, you are eventually left entirely empty, staring at your reflection in a stream and realizing you have no idea who is looking back at you. Claire was forced to confront the horrifying truth that she had built her entire house on someone else's property. The community she had bled for watched her walk away with chilling apathy. To them, she was a broken appliance, a spent battery that had simply been replaced by a newer, shinier model in the form of Olivia. The pack's indifference was the final twisting knife. It solidified the brutal reality that her sacrifices were never logged in a ledger of loyalty, they were simply consumed and forgotten. In this suffocating isolation, Claire had to navigate the treacherous waters of cognitive dissonance. How could someone who claimed to care for her throw her away so easily? The human brain rejects this level of cruelty, attempting to rationalize the abuse to protect itself from the sheer horror of malicious intent. Claire spent countless sleepless nights agonizing over what she could have done differently. If she had just been a little stronger, a little more patient, a little more subservient, perhaps he would have chosen her. This internalized blame is the abuser's final gift to their victim, a self-destruct mechanism planted deep within the psyche, ensuring the victim continues to tear themselves apart long after the abuser has moved on. Yet, it is precisely within the crucible of this unbearable agony, where the old identity is burned away to nothing but white ash, that the foundation for a staggering transformation is laid. Yet, it is within this absolute void, stripped of every title and tether, that the most terrifying and beautiful metamorphosis begins to take shape. Healing, true healing, is not the peaceful, serene process we see in fairy tales. It is a violent, bloody, and exhausting rebellion against the gravity of despair. For Claire, the turning point did not arrive with a sudden burst of magical empowerment or a miraculous rescue by a passing hero. It arrived in the dirt, in a moment of pure, unadulterated rage. After weeks of starving her own spirit to feed the ghost of Ethan's memory, Claire finally hit the absolute bedrock of her grief. And beneath that bedrock, she found a dormant, ancient fury. Psychologists refer to this phenomenon as post-traumatic growth, but in Claire's world, it was nothing short of an internal resurrection. She realized that for her entire life, her extraordinary gift of healing had been functioning backward. She had acted as a filter for the world's toxins, absorbing the poison of others while giving them her pure, untainted strength. Sitting alone in the wilderness, Claire made a profound, terrifying decision. She stopped bleeding for the world and turned her magic inward. The sheer agony of directing that immense healing energy toward her own shattered psyche was unimaginable. It required her to vividly re-experience every betrayal, every slight, every moment she made herself small, to make Ethan look tall, and to cauterize those wounds one by one. As she healed her own mind, a shocking revelation washed over her. fundamentally altering the trajectory of her existence. Her power, the life force that Ethan had so eagerly consumed to build his empire, did not belong to him. It had never belonged to him. The strength he paraded around as his own alpha majesty was entirely borrowed from her veins. Claire began to understand that she was never the weak, dependent creature Ethan had manipulated her into believing she was. She was the sun, and he was merely a cold, dead moon reflecting her light. This cognitive shift is the ultimate weapon against narcissistic abuse. When the victim reclaims their narrative and realizes they were the source of the value all along, the trauma bond shatters permanently. Claire stripped away the title of healer as a badge of servitude and reforged it into an armor of absolute autonomy. She learned to harness her energy not to mend the broken, but to fortify the strong, starting with herself. Her physical form changed, her posture straightened, and the exhausted, hollowed-out girl who had limped away from the pack transformed into a striking, formidable woman, vibrating with contained power. She learned the vital difference between being selfish and being self-protective. For the first time in her life, she instituted boundaries, recognizing that her energy was a finite, sacred resource, and anyone who wished to partake in it would have to earn it with genuine respect, not demand it through entitlement. This internal alchemy, turning the lead of her suffering into the gold of self-mastery, created a beacon of quiet strength that would soon draw the attention of a world far larger and more complex than the narrow-minded pack she had left behind. While Claire meticulously rebuilt her soul from the ashes, the empire she left behind was already beginning to quietly rot from the inside out. Ethan had ascended to his throne with the glittering, politically powerful Olivia by his side, firmly believing that he had successfully upgraded his life. But narcissism comes with a fatal blind spot: the inability to distinguish between the superficial polish of an object and the structural integrity of a foundation. Ethan had discarded the steel beams of his kingdom in favor of a golden facade, and the weight of his own incompetence was about to bring the roof crashing down upon his head. Without Claire's silent, constant intervention, the harsh realities of leadership began to violently erode Ethan's carefully constructed image. Olivia, raised in privilege and steeped in vanity, was a trophy to be displayed, not a partner in the trenches. When the pack faced brutal skirmishes, disease, and the relentless pressure of survival, Olivia offered only complaints and demands for luxury. She could not stitch the torn flesh of the warriors. She could not absorb the alpha's crushing anxiety. She could not whisper the quiet, brilliant strategies that Claire used to feed him in the dead of night. Ethan suddenly found himself bleeding, both physically and metaphorically, and for the first time in his life, there was no one standing behind him with a bandage and an excuse. The pack, sensing the true weakness of their alpha without his magical battery, grew restless and disillusioned. In sharp, breathtaking contrast, Claire's journey led her into the territory of the Northern Wolves, a formidable, ancient pack whose social structure was based on merit, wisdom, and mutual respect, rather than tyrannical entitlement. Here, she was not viewed as a biological vending machine. When the Northern Alpha, a deeply intuitive and grounded leader named Kael, recognized her immense abilities, his reaction was not to exploit her. Instead, he offered her a seat at the council table. He saw the scars of her past and understood the unfathomable depth of a woman who had survived the death of her own innocence. This new dynamic was a profound psychological revelation for Claire. For the first time, she was experiencing a relationship both platonic and burgeoning on romantic that was reciprocal. Kael did not demand her energy, he protected it. When she offered to heal a wounded warrior, Kael ordered her to rest immediately afterward, ensuring she was nourished and shielded while she recovered. He valued her not just for what her hands could fix, but for the brilliant, strategic mind that had observed pack dynamics from the shadows for years. Claire realized that true love and respect do not require you to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. She had finally found an environment where her worth was an inherent truth, not a daily quota she had to meet to avoid abandonment. The juxtaposition was poetic. As Ethan starved in a palace of his own making, desperately missing the very woman he threw away, Claire was finally feasting at a table where she was recognized as an equal. The universe possesses a dark sense of irony, invariably orchestrating a collision between the ghost of who we were and the architect of our destruction. The inevitable confrontation did not occur on a grand battlefield, but in a tense, politically charged summit between the deteriorating Southern Pack and the rising Northern Empire. Ethan, desperate, diminished, and desperate to stabilize his crumbling reign, sought an alliance. When he walked into the negotiation hall, he expected to face the Northern Alpha. He never expected to look across the heavy oak table and see the woman he had discarded, seated beside Kael, radiating an aura of authority and untouchable grace that physically knocked the breath from his lungs. Ethan's reaction is a fascinating, repulsive study in narcissistic collapse. Seeing Claire not only surviving but thriving without him short-circuited his reality. In his mind, she was supposed to be a tragic, pining casualty of his greatness. Instead, she was the very picture of everything he lacked. Driven by panic and a toxic nostalgia, Ethan attempted to deploy his old tactics. During a recess, he cornered her, his eyes brimming with manufactured tears, offering hollow apologies and desperate promises. He told her he had made a mistake, that Olivia was a disaster, that he needed his true mate by his side to save their home. He tried to trigger her deeply ingrained guilt, appealing to her old identity as the savior, hoping to slip the collar of codependency back around her neck. But as Claire looked at Ethan, she experienced the most profound, liberating emotion a survivor of abuse can ever feel: absolute, unadulterated apathy. She did not feel anger. Anger implies you still care enough to be hurt. She did not feel a desire for revenge. Revenge requires you to value the other person's suffering. She simply felt nothing. Looking at the man who had once been her entire universe, she realized he was remarkably small. The terrifying monster that had haunted her nightmares and dictated her self-worth was just a pathetic, inadequate boy, masquerading in an alpha's coat. Claire did not scream. She did not cry. She simply looked into his desperate eyes and softly said, "You cannot drink from a well you deliberately poisoned, Ethan. My light is no longer yours to consume." With those quiet, devastating words, she severed the final invisible thread of his control. She didn't reject him out of spite. She rejected him because he was entirely irrelevant to the spectacular life she had built. This story is a masterclass in the terrifying journey of self-reclamation. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that sometimes, the people we love most are merely lessons wrapped in tragedy. The ultimate victory over those who use us is not to destroy them, but to outgrow them so completely that they become a forgotten footnote in the epic saga of our lives. Claire's journey from a self-sacrificing utility to a sovereign queen serves as a stark, screaming warning to anyone who treats devotion as a given. And for those of you listening who are currently trapped in the shadows, bleeding for someone who refuses to see you, let Claire's awakening be your catalyst. Stop pouring your soul down the drain. Turn your healing inward, rise from your knees, and let them watch you become a force of nature they can no longer afford to touch. In the end, Claire's harrowing journey serves as a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit when it chooses to stop serving its own destruction. She began as a hollow vessel, drained of her life force by a narcissist who mistook her boundless empathy for weakness. Stripped of her title and exiled from the only home she knew, she faced the terrifying abyss of a total identity crisis. Yet, rather than allowing the betrayal to extinguish her light, Claire executed the ultimate emotional alchemy. She turned her formidable healing power inward. By refusing to continue bleeding for an ungrateful environment, she forged an impenetrable armor of self-respect and strict boundaries. Meanwhile, Ethan's empire, built entirely on her unacknowledged sacrifices, rapidly crumbled under the weight of his superficial choices and inherent incompetence. The climax of their story is not marked by a dramatic act of vengeance, but by the devastating power of Claire's complete apathy toward the man who once controlled her universe. She did not need to destroy him, his own arrogance did that for him. She simply outgrew him, finding her rightful place beside a partner who protected her energy rather than consuming it. Claire's evolution from a discarded utility to a sovereign queen reminds us that our deepest wounds can become the bedrock for our most towering strength. The profound lesson: true worth is not measured by your capacity to endure mistreatment or your utility in fixing broken people. When you endlessly pour your energy into those who take it for granted, you are not being noble, you are actively participating in your own erasure. The ultimate triumph over toxic dynamics is not vengeance, but the radical reclamation of your own energy, recognizing that your light was always yours to keep. How to apply this to your life? Take a hard look at the relationships in your life right now, whether romantic, familial, or professional. Are you constantly the giver, the fixer, or the emotional sponge for someone else's chaos? Stop treating your empathy as an infinite resource for ungrateful people. Institute firm boundaries immediately. Learn to say no without guilt, and recognize the vital difference between being selfish and being self-protective. Turn your healing inward. Prioritize your mental well-being, invest in your own growth, and remove yourself from environments where your worth is treated as a daily quota. Surround yourself only with those who offer you a seat at the table, not those who expect you to serve it. Question for you: what is one boundary you have set recently to protect your own peace and energy? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, so our community can learn and draw inspiration from your perspective. If you found value in this story and want to hear more empowering content, please subscribe to the channel to support us and fuel our motivation to create more great videos for you.